Story 1 Railroad Crossing. A man was driving home from work one evening when he came to a railroad crossing. The traffic lights turned red, so he stopped the car in front of the tracks. He heard the bell ringing and saw the barrier slowly coming down. He glanced to his left and noticed a teenage schoolgirl hurrying down the sidewalk. When she saw the barrier coming down, she started running, trying to cross the tracks before the train came. Halfway across the railroad tracks, the girl suddenly stopped. Her foot was caught in a gap between the wooden slats and the metal rail. The train was approaching fast. The man watched in horror as the girl tried desperately to free her leg. He jumped out his car and ran over to the barrier, waving his hands and shouting, attempting to warn the train driver. It was no use. The girl couldn't free herself and screamed out, "I don't want to die." The man turned away and hid his eyes as the train thundered through the intersection. He cringed as he heard the girl's screams suddenly cut off by the deafening clack, clack, clack of the train on the tracks. As the train roared off into the distance, he gingerly opened his eyes and forced himself to look. He braced himself for the terrible sight he was expecting to see. But the railroad tracks were completely empty. There was no sign of the girl's mangled body. There was no blood at all. He looked around, wondering what had happened to her. Where could she be? Did she manage to free herself in time? Just then, he noticed a small marble plaque on the wall between the barrier and the railroad tracks. It was surrounded by flowers and candles. The inscription on the plaque read, "In loving memory of our darling daughter who was taken from us much too soon. Rest in peace." Story 2 Dead Woman. A few years ago, I rented a house in the countryside. My neighbors were a married couple named Lisa and Michael. They had 2 young children, a boy and a girl. They were a nice, quiet family and pretty much kept to themselves. One night, I was awakened by a blood-curdling scream. It sounded like it was coming from the house next door. I jumped out of bed, threw on my dressing gown, and ran downstairs. When I got to my front gate, 2 small figures came flying at me and almost knocked me off my feet. I realized it was the kids who lived next door, but I was stunned by their appearance. The boy was in his pajamas, and the girl was in her nightie. Their faces were deathly pale, and they looked up at me with terror in their eyes. Both kids held on to me and began to cry. Their mother came rushing towards us, and I could see she was terrified as well. "What happened?" I asked. I heard screams. "There's someone in our house." Lisa gasped, her voice shaking with fear. I heard someone in the kitchen. I was too afraid to go check. Then I heard someone climbing the stairs, and I heard the door to my children's bedroom opening. Then I heard my daughter screaming. It was terrible. I immediately got the kids and we ran out. "Did you see who it was?" I asked. "No," she replied. The children ran out of the bedroom. I didn't dare to check it. "Please help us. We need to call the police." I looked at the children, still trembling with fear. "Where's their father?" I asked. "He's working the night shift," Lisa said. I told him to go into my house and call the police. She thanked me, took her children by the hand, and ran to my house. I decided to check out their house. The front door was standing open. It was dark and silent. All of a sudden, I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I had the strangest feeling that someone was watching me. In the back of my mind, a little voice kept telling me, "It's a trap." I don't know what came over me, but at that moment, I was very scared. Scared of the unknown. Scared of what might be lurking inside the darkened house. "Pull yourself together," I muttered. "You're not a child anymore." I started to walk up the garden path, but then I saw something that made me stop in my tracks. Click! In one of the upstairs windows, the light suddenly came on. The house was supposed to be empty. I looked up at the lighted window, but I didn't see anything, just curtains blowing in the breeze. "There's something up there," the little voice in my head whispered, "and it's not afraid of being found. In fact, it wants you to find it." I tried to tell myself I was just being silly. How stupid was it for an adult man to be afraid to go into a house because he is afraid of ghosts? If it's a thief, I thought to myself, then why would they switch on the lights? Click. The light turned off. What the hell? I thought, and took a few steps back. I still did not see anything in the darkness, but I felt goosebumps rising on my skin. Click! The light turned on again. When I looked up at the window, my heart skipped a beat. There was a dark figure standing there. It was a woman. Her skin was taut and shriveled, and her hair was long and unkempt. She looked like a corpse. She just stared down at me with her hollow, empty eye sockets, and she smiled a dead smile. Click! The light went out. I turned and ran back to my own house. When I got to my front door, I banged on it until the neighbor lady let me in. She looked at me with a mixture of fear and anxiety. My face was pale and my eyes were so frightened that the children began to cry again. Water. I panted. I need water. Lisa grabbed a glass, filled it with water, and handed it to me. I downed it in one gulp. My heart was pounding, and I had broken into a cold sweat. I was afraid that I was having a heart attack. Did you call the police? I asked, trying to pull myself together. They're on their way, she said. Did you check the house? Let's just wait for the police. I replied. A few minutes later, the police finally arrived. They searched the house from top to bottom, but they didn't find any thief. There was no one there at all. The police questioned the neighbors, but nobody had seen or heard anything. When they questioned me, I didn't tell them what I had seen. What could I tell them? That I had seen a dead woman in the window, smiling an unearthly smile? Nobody would believe me. The police eventually finished up their business and left to take care of more important things. Around 7 o'clock in the morning, the woman's husband came home. The children were glad to see him, and together, the family returned to their house. I try not to look at their house, especially at the upstairs window. After that crazy night, I began to have trouble sleeping. As soon as I closed my eyes, I would see the face of the dead woman. Then, life seemed to get back to normal. The neighbors gradually managed to forget all about the incident. No one screamed during the night, and I didn't see any dead bodies standing in windows. Everything seemed to be back on track, and life was good. But one evening, about a month later, I heard someone knocking on my front door. The knock was loud and strong. They kept banging and banging, as if they were going to break my door down. I looked through the peephole and saw that it was the neighbor lady, Lisa. I opened the door and found her standing there, grinning at me. What happened? I asked. She didn't reply. She just smiled and walked straight past me. She went into my house and turned left into the living room. She left me standing on the doorstep, dumbfounded. That fixed smile on her face unnerved me. It was so creepy, almost inhuman. It made me shiver from head to toe. It was dark outside, and no birds were singing. I was about to follow her inside when I heard voices coming from the house next door. When I glanced over the fence, I saw the neighbor children playing in the front yard. Then I froze. I could not believe what I was seeing. Lisa was there. She was standing there in her front yard, playing with the children. I couldn't move. It felt like my entire body was paralyzed with fear. The little voice in my head was asking only one question. If Lisa is over there, then who is in my living room? I didn't stop to check. I immediately ran to the house next door and asked my neighbors to call the police. 2 officers arrived and searched my house from top to bottom, but they didn't find a living soul. How could they? The only person in my house was a dead woman. The next morning, I left the house and I didn't come back. Now I live in a city where there are more live people and less dead. I heard that my former neighbors, Michael and Lisa, moved out soon after I left. I asked around, and one of my friends said that the reason they moved was because the mother and father of the family had gone insane. They're such fools, my friend laughed. They thought that their house was haunted. I tried to laugh along with him, but I couldn't even muster a smile. Story 3, Greenbrier. There was a young woman named Zona Shue who lived in Greenbrier County in West Virginia. She was married to a man named Edward who worked as a blacksmith. They seemed very happy together. But Zona's mother never liked Edward Shue and warned her daughter not to trust him. One day, after they had been married only 3 months, Edward sent a young African-American boy named Andy Jones to his house on an errand. He was supposed to ask Zona if there was anything she needed from the store. The boy found Zona's body lying on the floor at the bottom of the stairs. Her eyes were wide open and staring right at him. She was dead. The boy ran home to tell his mother, and she raised the alarm. Edward went home, carried his wife's body up to the bedroom, and dressed her in her Sunday best. When the coroner arrived an hour later, he found the dead woman wearing a stiff collared dress that covered her neck, and she had a veil over her face. Edward was cradling his wife's head and sobbing hysterically. When the coroner tried to take a closer look, Edward reacted so violently that the coroner gave up and left. He listed her cause of death as being due to childbirth. The strangest thing about it was that Zona had not even been pregnant. When Zona's mother found out her daughter was dead, she shouted, "The devil has killed her!" During the funeral, Zona's mother took a sheet from inside the coffin and brought it home. When she washed it in a basin, the water turned as red as blood. The old woman believed this was a sign that Zona had been murdered. Every night for the next 4 weeks, Zona's mother prayed that the truth about her daughter's death would be revealed. She didn't have long to wait. One night, the ghost of Zona appeared to her mother and told her exactly how she had died. She said Edward was cruel and abusive to her. One day, he went too far. She told him she had no meat for his dinner, and Edward flew into a rage. He attacked his wife and broke her neck. When she said this, the ghost slowly turned her head completely around at the neck. The next morning, Zona's mother went to the police and told them what she had seen. Although they were skeptical, they dug up Zona's body again and performed a proper autopsy. When he heard the news, Edward began to get nervous and stressed out. He wandered around the town saying, "They will not be able to prove I did it." The autopsy revealed that Zona's neck had been broken and she had been strangled to death. On her throat were the marks of fingers. Edward Shue was arrested and charged with murder. When the police investigated his background, they found some suspicious facts. Edward had a violent temper. He had beaten his first wife severely and thrown her out of the house. His second wife had died mysteriously of a blow to the head. As he sat in his jail cell, Edward was sure he would not be convicted of Zona's murder. He told everyone who would listen that there was no evidence against him. During the trial, Zona's mother was called to testify on the stand. She told the jury how Zona's ghost had appeared to her and revealed the name of her murderer. Nobody knows if the jury took her story seriously, but they did come back with a guilty verdict, and Edward was sentenced to life in prison. He died a few years later in Moundsville Penitentiary.